start over with my intro. So I'm Addie Smith-Ryman. I'm the executive director with the Portland Society for Architecture. We are a nonprofit that encourages innovation and vision in the built environment through education, advocacy, and engagement. This is the third and final in our ADU series, which is part of our Complete City. If someone could mute themselves, that would be awesome. Let's see. If everyone could mute themselves, that would be fabulous. So like I said, this is the third in our series on the ADUs. We are launching a design competition next week called the Complete City Filled In, where we will be testing the city's ADU policy that was recently relaunched as part of the Recode rewrite. This micro study will allow us to address the feasibility, affordability, and constructability of increasing density throughout the city, taking advantage of existing vacant spaces, and tapping into the building technologies, sustainable methods, and workforce development for the build out of these structures. This is run by a committee, an extraordinary group of architects in our community that are volunteering their time. Alyssa Panadistak is our PSA board president and an architect with SMRT. Danielle Fwasi is our PSA secretary with Kaplan Thompson. Also with Kaplan Thompson is Kara Biondi and Ben Bailey. Chris Miller is a former presenter in this series, as well as a PSA board member, and he's a principal with New Paradigm Design Workshop. Russ Tyson with Wit Architects, and Patrick Costin with Canal 5 Studios. Really, without these folks, we would never be able to get any of this off the ground. So we're exceptionally grateful. As we continue to talk about our shared spaces and land use, I'd like us to take a moment to recognize and honor the current Indigenous people of Maine, who comprise the Wabanaki Confederacy, and those of our guests south of Atlanta, both the Muskogee and the Cherokee tribes of Georgia, who have stewarded our land throughout generations. And with respect for the tradition of these Indigenous people, we affirm their inherent sovereignty in this territory, and we are hopeful for healing. With this, we will commit to the ongoing work of decolonization in Maine and beyond. So thank you. Without further ado, we now will welcome John Anderson, who is a principal with Tri-Cities Land. John is actually a regular in Maine, if you will, through Build Maine. Kara Wilbur actually recommended John for today's talk. So I look forward to when he can physically return back to Maine. And I'm also looking forward to the robust conversation after his presentation, because I did ping him to challenge our challenge as well. So I'm really excited about that. John has a diverse experience, beginning with a foundation in construction trades, moving on through design and development and land code. And he plays a multitude of roles, but really has a brilliant ability to articulate critical challenge. And without further ado, I also, forgive me, I need to thank our sponsors, also without whom we would not be able to do this and offer these free programs. So thank you to our underwriters, our benefactors, as well as our sponsors, friends, and partners. Chris, the next slide too, thanks. Our sponsors, our supporters, our friends, and our community partners. We are exceptionally grateful for your continued support. So thank you. This will also be recorded and available on our YouTube channel, where we actually have a dedicated station devoted to this. We do have 97 folks that are registered for this. And while it is a small group today, I know that a lot of folks have been downloading the videos of past presenters. So this will be available likely by this afternoon, if not at least by the end of the weekend. And the best option for viewing is in your top right-hand corner under speaker view. John will appear and we'll share slides. And then when we are done, we will continue our conversation. So John, thank you for coming to Maine and welcome.
Well, Yeah. I mean, this morning I was in Atlanta, but now I'm in Maine. It's great.
Yeah.
Teleporting. Well, thanks for having me. I get a sense that if you put architects together in a well-intentioned group and try to address the problems of the modern world, you're going to end up with two buckets. Things that were done taking the opportunity to challenge physics and reality, amazing flights of fantasy that would be really cool. And then there's other people, that are more pragmatic and are looking for things that are brought to the ground. My personal theory is that the folks with the flights of fantasy are working in an office where they're drafting urinal separation, partition, attachment details in high school renovations, and they just haven't been able to exercise their creativity lately. So I'm hoping that as people pay attention to this design competition, that do a quick sketch of something completely bizarre, put that aside, and then really dig into what would it take to get this done, and what are the limitations of the legislative sausage that y'all are going to be dealing with. So I'm going to start with a couple of, I'm mostly going to talk about how do you finance an ADU. But I'd also like to take issue with a number of things that make an ADU more expensive and by extension, more difficult to finance. In New England, where we have seen dignified, fourplexes, around the corner from Carnegie Libraries, and triple deckers all over the place, and farmsteads with multiple buildings, duplexes, exotic building types, right? For some reason, the city of Portland is going to ask for a separate set of utilities for an ADU. Is there a separate, sewer tap for all 3 units of a triple decker? It's like, are people in the ADU going to actually crap that much more than they would have if they were in a duplex? So not only do you have to be able to find a route all the way out to the street, but you're gonna have to cut up the street. And I know that because it never snows and there's never any freezing rain in Maine, you don't have to worry about snow plows hitting that patch where you tap the sewer main in the middle of the street. Oh, but you could have 2 ADUs. Do you have to have both of those, like on each of them or on their own separate ones, or can you combine? No. So you could have 2 patches in front of your house. So that would, and so your street would make a noise when the plow goes by. So often around the country, we see ADU ordinances that are really great until somebody caved because 4 people spoke up at a public meeting and said, well, what about parking? And so now an ADU has to have 2 or 3 or 5 or 25 dedicated parking spaces, which, kills the project. The number of folks that could live quite happily without having to have a car would need to pay for the creation of parking they don't need at that point. And I think that the idea that we're going to prioritize parking over housing, I don't think anybody's deliberately running on that sort of platform for the city council. It's like, yeah, screw where people live. I want to know where they park. That's my priority. So nobody's going to come out and say that, but the effect is the same. And then finally, the notion of owner occupancy. You have to live in the house or the ADU, as the owner of the property. It's okay. You could rent out a single family house that you no longer live in. You could buy a house and then rent it out. You could buy a duplex and live in half of it and rent the other one out. And all those situations when you rent housing are subject to the Federal Fair Housing Act, which is, it's not a building code, it's civil rights legislation. So I don't know what sort of, special dispensation or exception Portland is expecting to get from complying with federal civil rights legislation. It's like, oh, you can't do this unless you live in one of the buildings, you know. So, and then if you move away to Tucson to take care of your mom and you rent out the house, now you can't rent out the ADU. Who's going to enforce that? So I think it's either naive, ignorant, disingenuous, or politically expedient, or maybe all four. So it's like and folks that are wrestling with this stuff need to get a real fucking problem. I mean, come on. You can't rent out the little house in back and the house in front. Really? Don't we have a housing crisis pretty much everywhere? So those are my rant topics. I'm sure I'll have a few more that I'll drop in periodically, but I don't know. I got 20 minutes of material about bullshit people expect about ADUs. So I'll tap that whenever I get lost otherwise. So let's go back to the idea of the very specific thing about how do you finance an ADU. I'll put up in the chat window links to my blog. And I'll actually probably show this one as a share my screen here, as soon as I can figure out where I'm at. Here we go, share screen. Okay. So who can afford to build those ADUs in their backyard? Who is this really serving? This was in response to someone in my town that said that in a city council meeting and got all kinds of nods. Like, you know, this is just bougie white people looking to be silly about little houses. And there was a lot of, you know, who could afford to do that? So, so this is an actual case study of a house on my block that they're building an ADU. In our place, you can only build half the size of the principal house or 800 square feet, whichever is less. I think that's a rather arbitrary and silly rule, but you know, there it is. So here's a 400 square foot, 1-bedroom ADU being built behind an 800 square foot cottage. So the most common financing scheme that I'm seeing is a couple of years ago, the couple that bought this house paid 10% down and $125,000. Their mortgage payment's about a little over $900 a month with insurance and taxes and everything, and private mortgage insurance because they didn't put down 20%. So they went and applied for a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, because now the house is worth $185,000. Their loan balance is $111,000. They have $74,000 in equity. So they took out $60,000, which means that they could build 400 square foot ADU at $150 a square foot. So so they were able to finance it with their HELOC, and then their new appraisal came in, and they were able to refinance at 3.5% down. Now their total mortgage payment is a little over $1,000, and they're getting $1,100 a month from the ADU, and they're living in the house rent free. So this works if there's been a big move in the value of the house between what you paid for it and what it's worth now. And a home equity line of credit is better than just a home equity loan because it survives. It's not a loan that has a beginning and an end. It survives. So I will stick this in the chat window later. So the basic structure of you take out an equity line on your house and you build your ADU. Now we're seeing tremendous shortage of skilled construction trades. So if somebody is a really excellent framer, plumber, electrician, why is it they're suddenly available to come and build your little 400 square foot cottage? You may be drawing from the junior varsity people of modest abilities, unless they're, you have a relationship to bring them up to the site. And also the price of lumber right now, mostly because of supply chain issues and increased demand and the pine beetle in Canada and a whole bunch of things. The construction supply chains for appliances and lumber and everything else, the you want to be able to look intelligently at what are your material costs going to be. And you might want to wait until the fall to build if your lumber price is going to be $6,000 above what it should have been. Or if you're going to wait 6 months until fall to build it, and you could be getting $1,000 a month in rent, you might bite the bullet and spend the money now. So the basic way to think about financing in general is first understand the relationship between rent and cost. Because if you can't get the rent, then you shouldn't build the building. So if you're going to have, let's start with, so you start with the rent. So for the sake of round numbers, let's just say that you could get $1,000 a month in rent for a nice accessory dwelling unit in the back of your current house. The rule of thumb, what we call the 1% rule, or the rule of 100, is that for rental property, $1 in monthly rent will typically support $100 in total project cost. So that means that if you're going to get $1,000 a month, you cannot spend more than $100,000 creating that place to rent, like land, permit fees, sewer connection fees, architect, engineer, bricks and sticks, interest on the loan, everything. So that's your total budget. So, $100,000. If it's going to cost you, all in about $200 a square foot, that'll tell you that you really can't build anything bigger than 500 square feet. Can you still get $1,000 for that? Yes. Okay. But understanding there's a relationship between the rent and the cost. So any questions on that before we go further, because it's a really important concept. Okay.
I was actually going to say, so it's interesting because I think, so Christopher Lee, who actually owns a company that works from site analysis to final build out, is on this, and he's been threading a chat. And so because this is a different format than our other two presentations, I would open this up to anyone that does have questions to actually jump in and chime in, because this will be more robust as a conversation. And so I don't want to lose Chris's thread and then also, not be able to just open this up. So because usually people have been putting themselves on mute and turning their camera off to just listen, but you're prompting. So I'm encouraging folks to get involved.
So there is no owner occupant requirement?
That's what, so Christopher said that there isn't an owner occupant requirement based on an amendment that the city council made.
Okay.
Do you want me to elaborate on it?
I'm sorry, was that Christopher? You came in a little muffled.
I can elaborate if you or can you hear me?
We can. It's just a hard connection. And then Cecilia just typed in there is a deed restriction, so it's a little muddy. Okay, well, maybe when Christopher gets a better connection, we can go back to that.
Okay. Well, if there's a deed restriction that says something about you can't rent it except for if you're living there, then somebody in Portland needs to sue the city and say there's no deed restriction on my house to rent my house. How is it an appropriate use of the police power of zoning for reasons of health and safety and general welfare to restrict my ability to rent my cute little cottage in the back?
Can you hear me
We can't
better?
actually,
I was
we
in a
really
dead
can't.
zone.
Yeah, your connection is pretty horrible. So I'm just going to ask that you find a better connection, because we would love to be able to include you in this, but yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chris.
Yeah. Okay.
But
So
I do have a question for folks on this call, because this is what's fascinating, is that our committee has read through this document quite a bit, and there is there's conversation off to the right too. And so even just clarifying what the rules are has been an interesting exercise. I'll leave it at that. So I think even just having that conversation collectively, I'm sorry that Christopher's connection wasn't good, but everyone, I mean, Chris Miller on our committee has gone through this with a fine tooth comb, and I'm looking at him, not his head. And so I just, yeah, I mean, that's, yeah.
okay, so let's see. J.M. Humbert's believe the types of rules are more to prevent developers that want to use an ADU rather than impacting the homeowner. Speaking as a developer, I find that kind of offensive. I mean, where do buildings come from? Is there an ADU ferry that makes them arrive in Portland that's special and different from everywhere else?
No, I'm allowing myself to talk here a little bit. I come from a different background. I'm not in Portland, Maine right now. I'm in Washington, D.C. And you may know that ADU under building codes go under R2. Like the two units do not need the same level of fire protection that regular 2/2s, for instance. And so my understanding of what happened is that DC started allowing ADUs, and developer jumped onto it and start developing those 2 units building with less requirement on the sprinkler, on the fireproofing to reduce cost. And after we're dividing and selling the 2 units differently. And I think that there is an issue of fire protection because they definitely use a loophole on the code. And so DC responded to that a year after, enforcing those requirements, like you need to be living on site to rent the property, and they even make you sign now a piece of paper saying you will never sell the downstairs unit separate than the rest of the house. Now, I hear your point of view of like, if you're a regular folk and you want to do something, an ADU, it starts being really complicated. I hear that.
Well,
I think it's a
yeah,
fair
but
point.
I mean, just the idea that you'll never sell the other unit. It's like, well, I'm not going to sell the other unit unless I bring it up to code and put in a 13-hour fire sprinkler system. Like, you know.
But I hear what you're saying, and I'm not defending.
So I think that these restrictions typically are motivated by something apparently reasonable, and they become more and more baroque and prescriptive, and they limit the very thing that people said they wanted in the first place. So apart from that, I think they're swell. So we have building codes that are based in something resembling building science that has to do with health and safety. And then we have zoning codes that are redundant on top of that, that set things like setbacks and minimum yard requirements and the like, or limit some development to only single family houses. It's increasingly being called exclusionary zoning and tying it back to a history of segregation. So we've got all these rules. And when you look around, you say, okay, here's a building and we have room in the back for 2 small buildings. And then there are lots of flexible ways that I could use those small buildings. Now, you know, how do I navigate? First of all, how do I get permission to build something that makes common sense? Okay, I have to make sure it complies with the building code. That's fine. And then we have to comply with the zoning code, which is often a little bit more arcane and twisted and has this nonsense in it about, well, you can't rent it out if you don't live on the property. And we're going to come and enforce that. So I think it becomes important. The conversation I've had with folks in our office that have just come out of planning school or architecture school is that the zoning code, you need to understand, where did it come from? It didn't come down on tablets from Mount Sinai with Moses, right? It didn't spring fully formed from the forehead of Zeus. It was not written by the great philosopher kings of yore who used to be on the planning commission in your little town, right? This is at best a political document full of compromise, frustration, and grievance, right? And often contradictory. And there's often a disconnection between the comprehensive plan, right, and the zoning ordinance that will control the finer details. So the comprehensive plan has the first quarter inch that when you read it, you would weep and say, my God, this is amazing. Why doesn't everyone live in Portland, Maine, right? And then you have a zoning ordinance that makes half of that shit completely illegal and impossible to accomplish. And those two documents exist, and we develop a fairly elaborate approach to the sort of cognitive dissonance that everybody feels when they read one document and then read the other one. And the result of that is because it's become institutionalized, the innocent reader, the young architecture professional, or the homeowner trying to figure this stuff out thinks, this does not make sense, it must be me. No, the document does not make sense because objectively it does not make sense, okay? And we're going to have to figure out a way to hack and work around the limitations of these documents to accomplish good things in the modern world. So if you do not have enough equity in your house to be able to directly pay for the construction of an ADU, there are a couple of really straightforward loan programs offered from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And I'll put these up in the chat, links to these up in the chat as well. One is the Choice Renovation Loan from Freddie Mac, which is also available with their low down payment, 3.5% and 5% down. Your loan amount is based on the completed value of the house you're basically doing a renovation on by adding the ADU. So what's it going to be worth when it's done? They'll lend you, up to 95% of that amount. So if you, and the other is the Fannie Mae home style mortgage. The other way to go is that you do a construction loan with your local bank or credit union, and you refinance the house later. But you need to have appraisers that recognize the value of having an ADU. And also you need the final lender to recognize the fact that if you're renting the ADU, that you have dependable income from the ADU that should be considered as part of qualifying for the loan. So these are all things that are in the rules that the Housing Finance Agency at the federal level has directed Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, VA to send out to all their lenders. But lenders often don't read that stuff and have lots of different loan programs to look at. So you may have to convince a banker that what is in their underwriting requirements allows you to, for them to sell you this loan. It'll be okay. No, it's really different from what we do. Yeah, well, if you would read what the people in New York sent you, it says that Fannie Mae will do a loan that allows me to build an ADU, and then you can sell that loan, on the secondary market. So you'll get a fee when you sell me the loan, and then you get another fee when you sell the loan to Wall Street, and you can replenish your cash drawers. It's how banking generally works. What's the problem? So there are issues of basically just bank culture, and so you need to be well prepared. The good news is that the secret documents that tell them whether they can make a loan or not, the underwriting guidance, the way that is distributed is not, in a black box delivered by Stagecoach. It's delivered in a PDF sent on the internet, and you can download it and you can see it and you can understand all about the rules that govern whether or not you can get a loan. So, and also just in general, banking has been described as, in today's world, is a career that is really a good choice for someone who can't handle the stressful environment of fast food, right? You can go into banking, you'll feel better. So just because someone is a banker does not mean they understand finance, does not mean they understand the product they are selling. cut them a break. It's like their first day at the auto dealership, working on commission, selling a product that gets delivered, comes off a truck and they have to sell it. And that's the product they have. It's the same. They're on a base salary plus bonus, basically are commission salespeople. The people in underwriting that look at the loan and guarantee that the commission people aren't going to mess up the bank's enterprise, they are salaried and they are the rule followers. They're the ones who actually read the 97-page PDF that says whether or not you can build an ADU. So other alternatives, one of the problems is that as construction costs go up, ADUs become quite expensive to build because usually their ratio of bathrooms and kitchens to less complicated space is higher than on a typical single family house. You don't have a lot of living room bedrooms to kind of puff up the house beyond the wet, more expensive pieces. So the other ways to think about this is to treat the ADU as an addition to the house. Now I'm going to go into appraisals a little bit to demystify that to some extent. I was in Portland, Oregon, the other Portland, for a couple of years. We were living in a 60s courtyard apartment. It was quite pleasant. And on the other side of the street that had bus service every 10 minutes and pot dispensaries and restaurants and a grocery store and a hardware store was a predominantly single family neighborhood. And in that neighborhood, there was a gorgeous 1,600 square foot Craftsman Foursquare that, it sat up on a little, it was up on the grade a little bit, had a big wraparound porch, had the original woodwork, had some stained glass in the dining room, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, beautiful oak floors, marvelous. And it was listed and sold for $800,000, right? It is Portland, Oregon. I was talking to the bartender at our neighborhood place, and she said that a couple months later that she and 4 roommates had rented that house. And I asked, what are you paying? And she said $3,200 a month, $800 a piece. So as a practical matter, again, the rule of $100 a monthly rent will support $100 in total project costs. If they're paying $3,200 a month in rent, the utility value, what that house is worth as a rental, as an apartment house, is $320,000. It sold for $800,000. That means that there's roughly $500,000 in the gap. That's $500,000 worth of speculative Beanie Baby, rare comic book, baseball card money that's counting on the fact that somebody's going to spend more later. Maybe someone will move there from Silicon Valley and pay $850 or $900 in a year or two. But in the meantime, they're going to be $2,500 upside down on their mortgage payment every month because they only have $3,200 coming in. So if the housing supply is sufficiently constrained in your town so that prices are high and getting higher, an appraisal based on the income a house makes, say your house plus your ADU, is going to be lower than an appraisal just for generic house square footage in that neighborhood of that vintage, right? So but ADUs typically don't get appraised at that same value. They get discounted because they're weird, right? They're not a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, right? They're not a housing commodity product yet. So if you have a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house and you add a master suite physically onto the back as a wing, you now have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, and your appraisal will be higher as a house with more bedrooms and more square footage than it would be for a house plus an ADU. So physically connecting it, even with a mudroom or laundry or office or something in between, and having it on the floor plans look as if this is just a big house, which then you lock out and put 2 IKEA bookshelves against the door. And the master suite has its own door to the outside. You know, that's going to be a financing mechanism that is a way to hack the system, right? You're doing the work and you're going to get an appraisal for a more expensive house, which you're going to happen to use as a rental unit or for your infirmed mother or whatever. Now, the definition of a dwelling unit includes permanent cooking facilities in the International Building Code. And that means there is a cooktop installed into the counter. There is a range, you know, a stove appliance. That's what constitutes permanent cooking facilities, right? And instead of induction burners, a microwave and a toaster oven on the counter, that's not permanent. You can do the same function as a stove, but it is temporary. So you could have a refrigerator, a dishwasher, but no stove. So it's not a kitchen, it's not permanent cooking facilities, right? So it's not a dwelling unit. It's a guest suite or it is a guest house. So will Portland require you to have separate sewer and electric services for a guest house? That would be something I would look at. Because you could build it as a guest house, and at some point down the future, if someone slipped a stove in there, now it becomes a dwelling unit. Now it's an ADU. But you know, can you go 70 in a 60-mile-an-hour zone and be polite to the cop and not get a ticket? Is it going to be enforced? So you may want to ask permission rather than ask forgiveness rather than permission on something like that. But at the same time, check the likely rent for a guest house versus a ADU. Is it $50 a month less not to have a stove for someone who eats a lot of takeout anyway? Now, you should have a heck of a wet bar, lots of counter space, lots of electric plugs, right? You can have a vent-a-hood, right? Over the place where you would have your toaster oven and your induction burners. But it's not a permanent cooking facility. So a heck of a wet bar with its own door is basically a stealth ADU attached to the house that you're financing as an expansion of the house.
I'm going to open this up to challenge your challenge, because there are a number of folks on here who definitely know the intricacies of this policy. And Christopher, I think your connection is better. And you
I think so.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so sorry about my connection. My name is Chris Lee, and I'm head of design and development at a company some colleagues of mine started that is focused on helping people basically get ADUs approved all over New England. And I just want to make some corrections on the rules in Portland, because, and starting by just saying, the rules in Portland are really, really good. They're probably in the top 3 towns and cities in all of New England in terms of favorability. We haven't seen many that are better. And specifically to the owner occupancy requirement. So it's not, I'm not surprised that there's a misunderstanding about this, because when we held a panel about a month ago to talk about the new ADU bylaw, we had a guest from the city planning, Matt Grooms, on, and we also had one of the city councilors who helped get it approved. And we discussed this owner occupancy requirement. And I had actually misinterpreted it a little bit, and so had the planner. What Portland did was the bylaw basically says that at the time of creation, the ADU or the primary house has to be owner occupied. But after the ADU is built, the owner occupancy requirement is gone. So what Portland has done is they've created a mechanism to prevent speculation on ADU creation and to create and prevent significant investor money from coming in and building these, but and still eliminated all of the issues that are associated with owner occupancy, where if it gets sold, can you rent both of them? None of that is an issue in Portland.
But that's such
And it
bullshit.
also,
That is such bullshit.
No,
You have a prohibition
wait.
against people building speculative housing?
it's
Well-
not a prohibition. It's an elegant solution for preventing it. Because ADUs traditionally they're a compromise between a single family homeowner who doesn't want increased density and a developer who wants increased density, and of course the people who need more housing at affordable rates. What Portland did was they agreed that the owner occupancy is too draconian and it doesn't work in a city that's suffering such a big housing crunch. So they essentially said, look, let's find middle ground, and let's say that the owner of the property has to be living on the premises at the time that the building permit for the ADU is issued. But after that ADU is constructed, the town no longer cares whether it's owner occupied or whether it's sold. So they found this, and it's the only time we've ever seen this in the hundreds of bylaws we've read. It's very interesting, and I'm forgetting the name of the city councilor who's an attorney who helped craft it. But it's really quite elegant. I was incredibly impressed by it.
I think that to say that Portland has the best of New England's ADU, that's, your claim to fame is that you are the leper with the most fingers. It's a relative benefit. And I think that this is just kabuki. It's nonsense.
Well, okay, so I want to rein us in a bit, just to be a bit more respectful, because you are our guest, but I'm also going to I'm going to sort of quell the hostility around this, because John, I know you're critical, but I also, we do have a fairly respectable forum here. So I think what we need to do is peel back and challenge, but respectfully challenge. So I think there's a worthy debate. There's a worthy debate of what is in the best interest of the community of Portland, what's legal, and then what's feasible.
Okay, so as a respectful, legal, feasible thing, you buy the building, you move into it, you build the ADU, you sell it. It just, for the people that have the best resources for getting them built, people that are in the business, to say that, oh, well, you can't do that, even though we have a housing crisis, you can't do that. It just seems, if not foolish, silly.
Yeah, and I agree. It's a weird ground that they're like, especially where there's always NIMBY. We're always dealing with what can get approved. It's the same thing you were commenting on with what can you actually build, given the cost of construction, the value, like what are you going to get for rent? It's the same with what can you get approved to increase density, because every big apartment project faces enormous opposition and drives the cost per unit up to exponential rates. So it's a way to try to get something improved that can have some organic growth. And on the West Coast, they've had enormous success with keeping some of these restrictions and still seeing pretty significant growth. Homeowners are finding ways to finance these. The biggest gap in the market of getting them done is not necessarily financing or construction labor. From what we've seen, it's just marketing. People don't know they can do this, and they don't know how to start. But as towns, especially Portland, Oregon is a big one. Los Angeles is in there. As they get information out there, and as more people come to this space and start making noise about these, homeowners start doing them. And that's what we saw. That's what we saw in Northampton and Amherst and Whately and the Cape, and now in Portland. You just got to tell people they can do it, and they find a way, because the need is so huge. And it's awesome leaving this in the hands of homeowners. I'm a small scale developer, and I would love to make it easier to do that. But I also really love seeing small developments being left in the hands of the people who live on the street, and making sure that they have the tools to do it. And before I hand off, I just want to correct one more thing about parking. ADUs in Portland are exempt from additional parking. It says that in table 19B in the parking section of the zoning bylaw. So if you build an ADU, you do not have to add a parking spot. You just have to make sure that your existing parking is in compliance with whatever you need for the number of units you have.
Okay, so it's the occasion of getting a new permit that says now you need to park into the house?
No. The ADUs are explicitly exempt from needing to expand at a parking spot. But what would likely happen when you go to pull a permit to build an ADU, if you're non-conforming in terms of parking, you would probably have to bring your property up to conforming. But stacked parking, there's ways to get that done. And a lot of I mean, I don't know how many properties are non-conforming when it comes to parking, but a lot of single family homes that have big driveways usually can fudge spaces and show a lot of parking.
Okay, so I actually want to go back to a comment that Kenton made in the chat, which is now that we've clarified a few points, to go back to the financing piece, because I think the conversation and also opening it up to more questions. I think financing and the intricacies and really your statement of is it a guest house versus an ADU is actually a really intriguing question and a riddle. And I'd love to stick more on the financing piece.
Well, I think that while we're waiting for questions, I think that if how to do it and how to start is the challenge in Portland, Maine, I would suggest a working group where people that have an interest in doing this band together, share knowledge, share best practice, share learning curve. For instance, the make your house bigger with a lockout suite. What are the consequences of the separate utility taps, and what are the workarounds for that? The other thing you can do in that setting is that if you can resurrect barn raising, getting an ADU in the dry, slab poured, framed, sheeted, windows in, now gets things to a point where you can deal with the interior during, on the weekends during inclement weather, of which you guys have a fair amount. But also you are now in a situation where a dynamic of learn it, do it, teach it. You build a culture of building. And this may become somebody's side hustle. People may form businesses coming off of this. It's interesting that something so elemental and basic requires a specialist to get done. Not to take anything away from the important work that Chris is doing, but the idea that this is hard, and the reason why it's not moving forward at a greater pace and greater frequency is it's hard. So between hustle and know-how and relationships, homeowners can move this forward. But also I would recommend, there's a great book called The House Hacking Strategy. How do you buy a house on a low down payment, live in it, rent out some rooms, or maybe you buy a duplex? How do you live relatively rent-free with other people renting from you? So you're providing inexpensive rental housing, you're you're building some wealth and some equity in the building, and you're lowering your own personal overhead. So particularly for younger folks or folks without kids, with kids, a duplex starts to make sense. But the house hacking strategy also lines out the 7 different loan programs that are from VA, FHA, and the like that you can use to finance a house hack, which is different from trying to do an ADU as a separate construction enterprise. The other thing I would encourage you to do is, if you're thinking in terms of taking on boarders and renting by the room, the idea of the master suite with a heck of a wet bar falls into that category. You have a boarder. Municipalities that have restrictions on how many people unrelated by blood marriage or common law marriage can live in a house, those rules are typically enforced by complaint. So as long as people are behaving nicely, you can have more than that number of people in the house. But if they don't behave nicely, or there are a lot of cars parked blocking other people's driveways, then you have an issue. But if you think about this in terms of, I'm renting out my house by the room, and one of these rooms happens to be separate and built in the backyard as a guest house. And also to think about this as if you were an immigrant with very little money. What would they do? They typically pool their money so that someone can typically build out their basement with cash. And then when their situation changes and they can refinance their house, then they repay the people in their network that help them to get the basement apartment built. I think a co-op is a question here. You ever heard anyone do an ADU co-op? I think you can do a co-op for the purposes of getting them built. You don't want to put the ownership, create a co-op ownership interest, because nobody has time or lawyers enough to fool with that. But if the barrier is, how do I do it? How do I start? Then how do I finance it and the like? If everybody in the co-op put in $5,000 and now you had $100,000 in construction funds that could be used, that you could build, and then when you refinance, you repay the $100,000 with interest. And then, so you have your own little revolving loan fund. Because if all you had was 10 grand, then you are not going to be able to build your ADU. But as part of a group of 10 people, and if there are 5 ADUs built a year, then in 2 or 3 years, you'll be able to build an ADU. Plus, by the time, if you're on the tail end of that, you'll be a freaking genius about ADU construction because you've been participating in everybody's barn raising. Mm-hmm. And there's something about a construction site that is a great leveler of cultural differences. You really appreciate other people's ability to help get something done. And you really are bothered by someone's ability to overcomplicate things. So a chance to work with your neighbors to frame and roof an ADU. And you could, as a co-op, you could have a sliding scale. If you want to tap into the co-op and get the co-op to build it for you, how does that get done? How do you bring expertise into it? You could bring in someone with a contractor's license who is not accountable for the overall budget, but is just being paid as a construction manager or consultant to train you about, how to do it. And you have a couple of designs that have been approved by the city. Now you've reduced the complexity of the thing. It's still a simple little building. Now the complexity is, how do you hook up a sub panel for electric? How do you connect the sewer to the house if it's just a guest house? How do you connect the sewer to the street? That's where your complexity is going to start happening, and those are all learnable things. I mean, nobody rolls out of the womb knowing how to make a sewer connection at the municipal trunk, right? It's all learned behavior.
Yeah, there were 2 questions about prefab, stick frame, traditional building, and the panelized. That was one question, but then Chris Miller bounced it into one, the prefab.
Yeah, well, we do, ever since Hurricane Katrina, we've been doing a lot of modular and systems build work on the Gulf Coast. If your site allows for delivery of a modular unit without heroic measures, without a crane, then they can be a good option. Panelizing can be a good option, but there's still more work to be done. You still have to fasten it to the foundation. You still have to connect all the utilities and the like. And if it's only 400 or 500 square feet, you might do better to just site build it. And if you think about this as adding capacity to the neighborhood, that there are now 14 people that know how to get this done. Now in New England, 14 people, 18 opinions. So that never happens here in the South. So if you think about this as not only building small buildings in your backyard and not only financing small buildings in your backyard, but building the capacity as like a cultural system, right? A culture of building. It extends to, well, what happens if someone wanted to finish their attic or finish their basement or, convert their garage? The idea that you could mobilize 20 people on a Saturday and a Sunday, as long as there's food and drink, it's one of the more rewarding habits you could have. It's like a community garden at that point. It's like, I am less interested in tomatoes that I grow myself versus tomatoes that someone else grows than I am spending time with the other people that are weeding their garden too. Because when you encounter a stranger, you always need a third thing to talk about. The car accident you both saw, the cute baby, the adorable dog who's actually kind of ugly, but you're not going to say that, or the baby that's kind of ugly, or the tomato. You need a third thing. Just walking up to someone and striking up a conversation, our culture doesn't do that. We need a third thing. Building a building, renovating an attic, whatever, is a great third thing. Mm-hmm. Also, it's not a chance encounter. You're there for the day. You got to figure it out. You got to get along. You got to be productive. You both want to be happy at the end of the day and proud of your work, right? Plus there's beer and pizza or lobster rolls, whatever. So I would encourage thinking about this as a working group or co-op. I would recommend against getting hyper-organized early on. That could stop actual progress. But and for folks that are nervous about not having building skills, make them hang around, make them do the video and edit it, make them come up with an explainer about how to get a loan from the People's Bank of East Portland. Who talk to Denise, don't talk to Bob. These are all important, helpful things that you could have. You could shorten your learning curve on. Now with prefab ADUs, I think there's an opportunity to turn the ADU from the production of an ADU from a service into a product, where this is the ADU we build. We have 3 models, and if we can get to your backyard without a crane, then this is the price. If we need a crane, that's the price. So that you don't have to become an amateur home builder to just end up with an ADU. And you don't have to hire someone else who has all the skills to build real buildings, but for some reason has opted to build ADUs. They need to make a living doing that. So if you can standardize the product and deliver it as a product, that's going to be a good fit for some people. And if you build it small enough, you can put it on the back of a tilt truck that they use for towing fancy automobiles. They also use those to deliver pre-made sheds. So if you had a metal building somewhere where you could teach the fine art of building ADUs and build a few on spec and have them sit there, and then you could deliver them to people's houses, folks that don't have that wherewithal, that would be a way to support that enterprise or your co-op or your loose affiliation of folks that are hoping to just make their money back on it. So it could be a side hustle for somebody. I think that while you could prefab, if it was on the level of home brewing, now actually microbrewing out in a rented space, as opposed to beer coming from St. Louis. Buying a prefab from somebody in Western New York that makes 400 houses a year, you'd be better off to develop a more locally adapted approach rather than take their standard product.
Yeah, so Kenton asks about something in our first series, we had samples from Los Angeles, and Los Angeles has pre-approved models, so it's thoughts on that would be
Yep.
great.
Well, I think
also,
that-
actually, before you answer that, I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. We usually hold these for an hour, and then we beg our guests to stay on a little bit extra longer to answer some questions, but I do know that folks do have to leave, so if you do have to leave, thank you. And John, I don't know if you can stay.
Sure, yeah.
Great.
It's Friday. No one expects anything from me today.
Okay. Great.
So let's see, the pre-approved plans. In Northwest Arkansas, a local foundation put together, commissioned a series of plans that would be pre-approved by local municipalities. And what they also found was that things still got hung up kind of in the how do I do it, how do I start realm, where, okay, I have a pre-approved plan. What do you mean I need a site plan? I can't just get a building permit? I saw this on the internet. It sounded easy. I don't know how to make a site plan. So I think that it's a good idea that also needs to go far enough in terms of in the city under R14B zoning, you're going to have to put this 5 feet from the property line. You're going to have to show where so here's a tutorial about how to draw a simple site plan. So I think that doing that and also providing people with easy access. You could have your co-op or your working group have site plan Saturday, where everybody that wants to put their house, an ADU behind their house on various circumstances, shows up and everybody gets a site plan and there's beer and pizza.
I love that.
I think that what that whole mnemonic about what would Jesus do? As architects, if you sort of get the wristband that says, what would coarse, terrible drywall contractors do?
Hello?
Practice and high morality.
No.
How would you do this? Is there a coarser way to go about this that other folks might take, and just gussy that up just a tad, as opposed to treat it like you would a set of working drawings for an elaborate custom house. So I think that standard plans, typically the municipality pays to have those drawn. You pay a fee that they're not stamped. And they have a set of, you have to figure out if you're going to have a local structural engineer stamp a foundation set or something, or you can have a prescriptive foundation given the typical soils. So that's a technical issue. So you don't want to create any liability for the, you don't want to, if you don't have to have a stamp on an ADU, don't create stamped ADU standard drawings. You don't want the liability. Let's see. Subsidies toward AD development. One of the greatest subsidies they could have would be to not require you to connect to make a separate utility connection. And that might be just as simple as a text amendment that the council puts forward on the agenda right after the consent agenda. It's like these are not the droids you're looking for. The financing incentives to build an ADU and then rent below market rates. There are programs for that where you could get a prefabricated ADU delivered by Multnomah County in Portland, as long as you agree to rent it to someone who's not housed or at a low income. And then you own it after 10 years. Well, you own it, but you have this obligation to rent it out for 10 years. And that's a very cost-effective way to provide housing. So the other way to approach it is that in Portland, Oregon, I'm just prescribing from my experience. It just coincidentally is the other Portland. There's a $20,000 impact fee for an apartment or for an ADU. And that impact fee is waived if you agree not to put your ADU into short-term rentals. So we always advise folks, convert your basement, put that into short-term rentals, and don't pay the 20 grand. Because again, the rule of 100, 20 grand turns into $200 a month. You have to charge somebody for the privilege of, that you might want to rent it on Airbnb. So but just think in terms of the cost of your project is going to translate into rent or into you subsidizing the rent because you spent too much money and you can't recover it in the rent. I would also really strongly encourage folks that when you are designing an ADU, there's a temptation to make it like an amazing sailboat cabin, that it's full of all kinds of trick storage details, etc. Don't do that unless it's yours and you're going to live there, and it'll be very satisfying. But this should be a very flexible building that can be used by a lot of different households, right? If someone had a child and it is a one bedroom, is there, and you put the kid in the one bedroom and now there's a reasonable sleeping place for the adult, use standard dimension cabinets, do things so that it isn't too precious, and it should be kind of a Swiss Army knife sort of building, that it isn't ideal for any one thing, but it covers the widest possible range of possible uses pretty well, right? You could in fact remove someone's appendix with a Swiss Army knife. You wouldn't have to have a scalpel, but a scalpel does not work well for whittling or all the other things you would use a Swiss Army knife for.
So before you read the question from Christopher Lee, I just want to swing back to that though, because it's interesting, the tension and dynamics between the doers who get stuff done and the architects who can dream and build and really do have a set of tools and skills. There's an elegance of design that can and should be should be applied to this. So the way we think about the context of a structure or even in the interior spaces, one thing in our competition we were talking about was when we ask folks to register, one of the questions would be, would you actually live in the ADU that you're submitting? And so I think that that's, there is an elegance to having design thinking behind this, which is just another level of problem solving.
Well, and I think that when I say you should make it as flexible as possible, if that's part of your program, that will probably turn into, a 9 or a 10-foot ceiling would make this a lot more flexible. Mm-hmm. If there's a limitation on square footage, then a mezzanine with less than a 6'6" height is not square footage. We could use that. If I use a vertically proportioned window and I have a small number of windows because I have a tight budget, I'm going to get more light into the house over a longer period of the day as the sun transits. I think that there is a place it shouldn't be basically a hacked box. It should be a dignified structure that has a lot of flexibility. And I think that there's a lot of room for design thinking in that.
Yeah.
At the same time, if you run the numbers on your building and you understand, if you were going to build this and rent it out, is that feasible? Because things like if there are restrictions that are coming to you because of the rules that make it economically difficult, now you have a really substantial argument for, hey, can we change this paragraph? Mm-hmm. If you move the colon, then life becomes a lot easier. There will be more of these.
Great. And so now if we go back to Christopher Lee's question about plumbing and how plumbing code should be applied to ADUs, where...
Well, the emails from plumbers and inspectors that they believe the confusion is just over the plumbing code. is there a provision of the zoning code that calls this out, or is this being handled in plan check over plumbing?
It's probably planned. It's probably, I mean, it's permitting and inspections that this
I
is.
could clarify if you want. We've seen some emails directly from the plumbing inspectors about this. And there isn't anything in the zoning bylaw that talks to this. This is not a zoning restriction. And the plumbing inspector in Portland, or one of them, or multiple of them, just think that plumbing code requires the plumbing of these structures to go to the street. And while we haven't followed up on this yet, I feel that it is just confusion over how plumbing code should be applied to this detached structure, because it kind of looks like a small single family house. And we don't get the sense that it's going to be a heavy lift to change this. I think it just needs someone like an engineer to clarify how plumbing code should be applied to these new things. So there haven't been any detached ADUs approved yet.
Okay.
So
I would suggest two things. It may be that they're being overly conservative because it's being considered a dwelling unit. So so there may be some concern there. But I think if you, rather than something that goes out in text, if you can come up with a prescriptive solution that cites the code, shows 5 examples of how that could be done, and that these are all legitimate, and it gets published and distributed within the department, then you're feeding them what they eat. Now they have a code justification, as opposed to they're relying on their interpretation. So if the chief building official says, I have seen this and I have said grace on it and it is fine, then that becomes an internal issue between the plumbing inspector and their boss, as opposed to a plumbing inspector and you standing out there trying to get your C of O.
There's also the question of alternatives as well. We talked about this internally in our committee, rather opting out of hooking into sanitation, but going for an incino-let and thinking of, again, looking at more sustainable options, and which would be DOA, so
Yeah.
it's sort of, how do you push that?
Yeah. Well, I think at this point, not having to dig a trench and cut up dig a trench from the ADU to the house, if gravity allows, or a grinder pump, and then versus coming out to the street. Now you need a street cut permit. Now things that increase the complexity of permitting and building and financing are things that you want to attack and either develop a kit of parts, a workbook, a manual. To Chris's credit, which I was very quick to dismiss as, yeah, you're great, you're the leper with the most fingers. That was uncalled for, but it's always on the tip of my tongue. I think if you are in a position where you are arguably one of the friendliest places, what would it take for you to be absolutely the friendliest place? So solve the problem by making it bigger, right? So so if you have running down one side of a matrix, the typical issues that people are wrestling with, and across the top, the solutions done by various municipalities, right? And that is an opportunity for the highlighted yellow column for the city of Portland, Maine, to demonstrate they have addressed every single one of these things, because no other city has actually handled everything yet, right? And I think that that'll, you'll get, basically 98% purity, and then there'll still be the 2% impurities, right? And they will be rabid NIMBYs with with too much time on their hands and tenure at the local university, make life difficult. And if you guys get all the way to 98%, and then you can apply the same creativity and force of will and cultural momentum, you may be able to solve that one too. It's like, you're gonna have to wait till last on this. You need to wait to the point where there are ADUs everywhere and it's no problem. The world didn't end. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are still in Massachusetts. It's fine, right? So You make it easier. You make it not just easy, but you make it culturally right. Then you start to marginalize the NIMBYs that would fight you for irrational reasons. Because also, if they're fighting you about on the basis of feelings and fear, you cannot bring a PowerPoint about logic and rational placemaking to a knife fight about feelings. You're going to get caught.
Right.
So you can't engage on the level of feelings until there's enough momentum, there's a glacier of goodwill that supports ADUs in Portland. You know,
John,
we're also in favor of indoor plumbing and don't throw eggs. And, don't beat your children. And of course you have an ADU. Where would your aging mother live if you didn't have an ADU? You Philistine. So there can be a tipping point once the practice is common enough and once the people that practice it are well regarded enough. ADUs are also a proxy for, if you're in a place where there's a lot of opposition to large multifamily projects, but there is no real opportunity for small developers to build small multifamily projects. So you're at there is no debate in the middle. It's always about the big lumpy project that is big and lumpy because the litigation around large multifamily is the same about the litigation about medium-sized multifamily. So let's go with economy of scale. And now it's somebody from out of town, someone from Massachusetts who wants to build a big apartment in our town, right? And it'll be occupied by renters. And I know from my experience, having previously rented, that the behavior of renters is abysmal because I remember my own example. Or renters is a proxy for poor people. And people that don't have a mortgage clearly are inferior. We can other them. We don't have to treat them with respect because they're not the same as us. So those are the larger, things that are under the surface all the time. And they'll come out on an ADU debate the same way they come out for the great big apartment debate. So instead of having a declension of many different possible solutions to solve housing issues, over 40% of the country rents, right? So and getting a mortgage doesn't make you a different person than you were before you signed all those papers before reading them.
Question, John. I had an interesting conversation with a builder, and I think we found a spot where like YIMBY and NIMBY concerns almost overlap. We were trying to think of, is there a way that you can break the ADU model, that ADUs could actually make Greater Portland like a less affordable, less socioeconomic sort of place? Like condos came up. Have you seen anything like that happen?
Oh yeah, in Austin, you should study the precedent in Austin as a cautionary tale of don't do that shit. Because the zoning code allows them to build an ADU and then create a 2-unit condominium, which means either party has veto power over the actions of the condo association. And then they sell the ADU as a condo and the house as a condo. And they're doing this because the demand for housing is so overwhelming that they sell. So at the same time, in Austin, you can build a single family house. You can build a single family house with a condo ADU. There's a very small area where you could build a townhouse. But after that, you have to build a podium building or a mid-rise condo. There is a real problem about the missing middle. And it's being sort of eaten away at the edge with this idea of ADUs, but the cost of construction is so high and the available rents that are there are so high. And the fact that people, the single professional women are quite happy to buy a $400,000, 1,200 square foot ADU as a condo. And they will crowd out other folks. So I would think hard about if you can increase either entry level fee ownership in terms of smaller houses on smaller lots. That takes some pressure off of the top, say 80% of rental housing, because those people can move up or they can also rent down. right? And when they rent down, now their dollars are in competition with someone that could spend a little bit more and get a little bit bigger rental, not have to share bedrooms or something. Now they can't because it's not available. So there is some benefit to those things filtering down, where it's either renovations or going to be small new construction. I think also the shifting people's expectation about how big a space they need changes is you can provide space for people to work that's also small and available for rent. Because now you don't need a 3-bedroom house because one has to be an office. And you can exchange ideas with people that you have chance encounters at the coffee shop next door. So building small commercial spaces or accessory commercial units that go on in the front yard. Neil Heller in Portland has put together a Google map identifying accessory commercial units built onto the front of the house, built as a freestanding, So I would encourage you guys to be supportive of a co-op or a working group so that you have a common project that isn't as, that can't be done in your own studio and then you send it in. Right now you have a design competition, people might team up and have a good time doing that, but for the most part, it'll be a solitary effort that's connected to other things.
Yes.
So if you have to go out and pour concrete with a bunch of other people and then have beer and pizza afterwards, that's a different experience. So have a common experience, on the practical side, right?
That is the fantasy, actually. That's so the idea is that we do this competition just to get people even talking about it. And again, it could be the fantastical, unattainable, and it could be the exceptionally pragmatic.
Right.
We'll have a public exhibition and then we'll continue conversations. You and I spoke earlier about, and where you were challenging me that we are not asking for numbers associated with the submissions, but we will in fact be looking, once all the submissions are in, at what those buildable aspects are. And then there is an ultimate goal to building one of the submissions collectively. And we haven't quite figured that riddle out yet, but the test is really exactly to your barn raising. How do we do this and where?
Well, I could send you a simple pro forma, that if people want to fill it out, they could. But I think it's helpful if you actually take that step. You might refine your drawing a bit, recognizing that this is going to be really hard to finance. Otherwise, you put yourself in a position where it becomes a little bit academic. Aerodynamic engineers and mechanical engineers lecturing birds about how to fly. Technically accurate, but slightly less than useful.
Yes, that's brilliant. So with that, there are a few requests. One, to have a link to the organization you spoke of, I believe in Arkansas, on the and then the lessons learned from Austin. I think we can also poke around the simple pro forma. And I think we're coming up on the half-hour mark overtime. So I'm exceptionally grateful for the folks that did stay on.
Well, why don't I send you a bunch of this stuff and an email form and you can send it out?
Yeah, I'll send it out when I send out the recording and the follow-up with everyone. So and then
I think also Chris's experience in the other towns in New England, everyone in New England would like to think that they are morally superior to Boston and probably Portland, Maine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your position in New England of shaming people that have town meeting into proper ordinances, if you thought about this as either at the state level or at the town meeting level, here it is, here's a package, this could be adopted. A lot of people want to be second. Show me a town that's just like ours that did this. Don't tell me about California. Those people are 9 feet tall and drive flying cars. Proper New England town. No, one in Vermont, because New Hampshire, that's bullshit. And I think that if you set your sights on influencing New England and Western New York, if you set your sights on making this a cultural glacier that that crushes NIMBYism under its weight, or floods it out, either way. And if you think about building actual on the ground capacity that is a step up from a complete DIY or hiring a contractor, people shouldn't have to become amateur home builders to do this. So the Ivy Van in New Hampshire is, she's in Peterborough. She's the chair of the planning board, and she's every third person in New Hampshire's in the legislature, but she's in the legislature as well.
Actually, I will shout out, I can't believe I'm doing this. I used to live in Vermont, so I'm supposed to not like New Hampshire, but New Hampshire is very progressive in a number of their planning initiatives. So we can make fun of New Hampshire a little bit, but I think we'd have to be fact checked a bit.
Well, I mean, I think that they've really drifted away from their cultural roots, because people that think, live free or die is an appropriate state motto, shouldn't complain about someone building a duplex. So, but they do. So, and also town meeting past a certain point is crazy. So, but my people are from Appalachia, so anything that happens in New England it's like another planet. So I will put together an email to send to you with some stuff.
This is awesome.
I've also got
thank you.
and I will make a submission on your design competition.
Brilliant. Good. Thank you. That is fabulous. Yeah. So next week, next week we are launching the brief. Everyone on this call, all of the subscribers, keep a lookout. And then we are actually looking to do a public exhibition. Of course, the riddle there is public gatherings and where that can take place, and how we go about that. I think many of us are in some stage of vaccination and believe, I don't know what we believe. It's a very confusing time.
Yeah.
But we will have some public exhibition, and then it will launch, phase 2 of what these conversations are. So for everyone to really get involved and know that this is just the beginning. And to also be critical, so I thank you, John, for your criticality on this and really questioning and thinking. All of us need to be wrapped around in that. Any further comments from anyone before I say thank you and stop recording? Thank you. So,
yes, thank you again. This is Jay, finally. Again, I'm speaking before everybody else has left.
Okay.
All right, I'm still in. I've got lots of ideas and still want to participate here. I was hoping, or it would be really cool if you were doing this like live again for the announcement and whatever else is ongoing for how things are going forward. I look forward to doing my best to try to fit in with the competition. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, a live launch of the competition where you can do Q&A.
Yeah.
Because that'll be much more efficient than people submitting emails and then you have to publish it and all that.
Yeah, that is a brilliant suggestion, and I think we'll definitely tie that in to how we do this. So yes, thank you very, very much. And again, John, thank you always. Look forward to having you physically back in the state. I don't know if it will be under a Build Maine umbrella or how else to get you up here.
Well, I've been meaning to come up and see one of our proteges, Tom Emerson in Kittering. So.
Oh, great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you everyone for coming, and this is only the beginning.
Great.